This is Join Us in France, episode 383. 383. Bonjour, I'm Annie Sargent, and Join Us in France is the podcast where we talk about France. Everyday life in France, great places to visit in France, French culture, history, gastronomy, and news related to travel to France. Today, I bring you a conversation with Elise Riven of Toulouse Guided Walks about the lovely city of Nantes. I was just there and had a wonderful time, so I wanted to tell you all about it, and Elise will provide some of the historical background on the city. And you know me, I want you to know that there is more to France than Paris, so that's why this is an important topic in my opinion. This podcast is supported by donors and listeners who buy my tours and services, including my very popular itinerary consult. You can browse all of that at Annie's Boutique, joinusinfrance.com/boutique. You know what people say when I talk to them about their itinerary? The first thing they say usually is, "Oh my goodness, this was so thorough. I was not expecting that much out of this itinerary." And it would be really nice to have that sort of feedback on the website as well. But I'm not quite the internet wizard that I'd like to be, so it might take me a little while. But if you have good suggestions, I'm open. And the other way to stay in touch with me and with the podcast and with news about travel to France is to sign up for the newsletter at joinusinfrance.com/newsletter. Bonjour, Elise.
Bonjour, Annie.
How you doing?
I'm doing okay. I have new eyes.
You have new eyes, yes, and you got your hair done.
I got my hair done.
Yeah, you did cataracts.
I did cataracts. Yes, it's very strange. I can now see everything on your face, and you can see. I can even see everything on my face, which is unfortunate because when I look in the mirror, I really don't want to. But there you are.
There you are.
It's nicer for driving and it's nicer for my eyes in general. But oh my goodness, the dust in my house. Let me tell you.
Anyway, today we're going to talk about Nantes, the lovely city of Nantes. I was just there a couple of weekends ago, and really it made a very good impression on me. And we lucked out. It was very sunny. So that always helps. Tell us where Nantes is situated, more or less, so people understand.
Okay. Well, Nantes is the city that's called the gateway to Brittany, actually. And it's west of Paris. It's slightly south and west of Paris. It's 342 kilometers southwest of Paris. There's a TGV train, the bullet train takes you right there. It's very easy to get there.
I took it.
It's equidistant also.
I took the TGV to get to Nantes. It takes 2 hours. It's really good. There's just one stop. Where did we stop? Can't remember. Anyway, it's very, very efficient.
You took it from Paris?
From Paris. From Montparnasse.
Okay.
Yeah. An excellent way to get to Nantes.
It's for people who are not planning on having a long drive in a car. If you're going to Brittany, there's a lot of good train service to Brittany from Paris.
Yep.
It's very easy. And it happens to be basically also the same distance from Bordeaux. It's north of Bordeaux because, of course, it's pretty much on the Atlantic. So it's 340 kilometers north of Bordeaux. Same thing. You can take a train there or take a car on the autoroute. It's 100 kilometers from Rennes, which is the other big city in Brittany, which is a bit of its rival, and that's part of its history. And it's 50 kilometers actually from the ocean because Nantes is actually on the estuary of the Loire. And out of curiosity, but also because I have crossed it many times, the bridges that cross the Loire, going through Nantes, going to other places in Brittany, and also because I've actually flown over it. I wanted to check because the Loire, there are many, many big, wonderful rivers in France, but the Loire is actually the longest river completely inside the country of France. And where it opens up into the Atlantic is where Nantes is situated.
It's a big mouth into the Atlantic.
Big mouth, a very big mouth. Exactly. And it's a city that the inner city is about 325,000 people. The metropolitan area, apparently, at last count, was about 665,000 people. It's a city that is also a big university center.
Mm-hmm.
Lots of young people there. Very dynamic, and has been voted a couple of times in the last 15 years as one of the most agreeable cities to live in France.
Yes, I thought it was very agreeable indeed. Of course, there are jokes about the weather being foul most of the time. They said that in Nantes it rains 10 days out of 7.
It rains. Is that what they actually say?
Yes, that's the joke. But it didn't. I mean, I was there Friday night until Sunday night, so 2 full days, and it didn't rain at all.
Well, that's very interesting because it's also, that's so strange because, of course, there are lots of cities in France that are more or less on the Atlantic. There are cities that are known for having a lot of rain, but when they're sunny, they're very sunny.
Yes.
It's very strange. I mean, I have never heard anybody complain about the weather in Nantes, but partly because I think people like the idea that they're so close to the ocean.
Yeah. And it's a very well-developed city. There's a wonderful tram system. There's I think it's 3 lines of tram, and they all intersect at the Place du Commerce, which is in the center of Nantes. Very nice pedestrian area. Most of the buildings, you don't see a lot of half-timbered houses, at least not in the center. But it's a very pleasant pedestrian area. The Uber could not drop us off right in front of the hotel because I had picked, we stayed at the Ibis Styles right in the center. It was not a very good hotel. I do not recommend it because it just needs to be refurbished. It's a beautiful location, but the rooms are kind of Uber drivers don't have the thing that they need to lower the
posts that are for residents.
So we should explain for people who have never been to France. In France, a lot of the city centers are close to car traffic. And the way they do this is that they install in the ground kind of pegs that come and go.
Like posts,
They're posts. Yeah. And the residents have a little, it's like a garage door opener, and it just lowers the pegs for them to go through, and they rise up immediately, so you can't. And taxi drivers have those things too to lower the pegs, but Uber drivers do not. Here's another, that's another one where you might want a taxi versus an Uber, because we ended up having to drag our suitcases quite a way. Live and learn. That's why I do a podcast, so I can tell you about all these things that you probably don't want to do. So in Nantes, if you're going to stay in the city center, get a taxi from the airport or from the train. No Uber. It's a very lively city center. There were lots of people, lots of restaurants, lots of lovely stores. It looks upper scale. The only thing is, right around the Place du Commerce, there were a lot of young men just standing about. You wonder what the heck they're doing there all day. I think they have some sort of commerce of weed or some such, but I'm not sure.
Unfortunately, I think you find that a little bit in almost every city center in France. Yeah. There's a corner where there's something like that going on.
Some loitering going on. Right. And there was no police. I'm sure that there are, cameras or whatever keeping an eye on them, but there were no police. None of them bothered us in any way. It's just, you're like, what are they all doing here? Like,
they're hanging out.
Yeah, they're hanging out, waiting for customers. Yeah. Right. So lovely city center. Really, I think it compares favorably with many other French cities. I think it's really one of the nicer ones, honestly.
Even though most of it is rebuilt.
Well, yeah, because a lot of the buildings are very nice looking. It's not really Haussmannian, but that sort of grand facades and nice white stone, and just very, very well done.
The grand facades. Yeah, we'll talk about it when we talk a little bit about the history of Nantes. They're from a specific time period of the history of Nantes, and luckily, apparently, were not destroyed during World War II.
Yeah. So there are plenty of things to see and do in Nantes. I think 2 days is the minimum to really see the city. I could have used a third, but, obviously you do what you can. So first I went to the Chateau des Ducs de Bretagne, which I thought was really beautiful. I was there right before closing time because I did that first thing on Friday when I arrived. And so they were closing in like half an hour. So I didn't even get a ticket to go in. I just walked around the ramparts. You can do that. And a lot of it is open. So you can enjoy the area even if you don't buy a ticket to go inside. Okay. Plenty to walk around and enjoy the views and whatever. Then we also went to Les Machines de Lille, which is they have the big elephant that you can ride.
There was a group of street theater people who in 1979 named themselves Royal Deluxe.
Okay.
They started here in Toulouse. And they got an idea based on the idea of street puppets, very big street puppets. I don't really know how it developed into the thing that it is now that we both have seen. But they got this idea to make these giant mechanized creatures that would do a parade in the street. And they're quite phenomenal. They're very, very, very big. They're made out of motors and wood and all kinds of things. And for example, there's one that spews water that's supposed to be like a dragon spewing its fire.
Yeah, they usually spew something.
They spew something. And unfortunately, for whatever reason, apparently what happened was that when they asked the city of Toulouse for a specific place so that they could have a hangar to store all of these, at this time, this is, I guess, at the very beginning of the 80s, the mayor at the time and the city council at the time said no. And so they went, thank you very much, goodbye. And they went to Nantes. And Nantes said, yes, we will have you here. We would love to have you here. And so that is how come they installed their machines, that's what everyone calls them, which are these fabulous creatures in this enormous hangar space, which is on one of the islands, because Nantes has a bunch of islands that have been included in the city and that have made connection to the rest of the city by streets.
Right. So what happens in Nantes is that they have these, not only do they have the big islands, but they also have the old chantier naval. So they had big hangars where they used to build boats, big boats, and that whole industry moved out, leaving all these empty spaces. And it's pretty close to the city center. It's like a kilometer. Right. It's a stroll. It's really close. And you can just... So they installed Les Machines de Lille. They're called Lille and not Nantes because they're on the Nantes island. And it's pretty spectacular. And a lot of it is open to the public. You can pay to get on the elephant, which we did, but I much preferred seeing it from the ground, really.
I loved seeing it from the ground.
Yeah, seeing it, walking around it. And it will take a stroll through that big old plaza 3 times or 4 times in the afternoon. So on a sunny day, there's a lot of people and kids and whatever. And it's worth going into it. There's also a visit that you could... So there's 2 levels. You can just visit their hangars and their facilities. Or you can also pay to ride the elephant. We did both. And it was fine. But honestly, it would have been just as fun just hanging around, seeing the elephant walk around.
And getting wet from the water spewing out of its trunk.
Yes, it does. I mean, it's not water, it's steam. But
exactly, steam.
Yeah, but it's very fun to watch. And the kids just are a delight to watch because they just squeal with joy seeing this thing move around.
I love it. I actually must admit that I actually love it. I think it's very ingenious, the idea that they made these creatures that are so huge, and they're very well made. They're very well articulated, and so it's nice. It's not typical just silly street theater, and it's I like the fact that it's that original,
Yeah,
so.
And they are now developing a giant tree with machines on the tree, flying machines.
Oh.
Yeah. And I don't know that they'll fly for real, but they'll be mechanized, they'll move around. They have a ton of little smaller machines that you can watch that they will animate for you, that you can see them, and it's a fun visit.
It's a fun visit because there's even a museum that explains how they started and how they built everything. And when we went there, we actually had a little bit of a lunch, and then we watched all the machines, and you kind of feel like a kid again when you do that.
Yeah.
You know?
And the whole area is very pleasant because there's a nice walk. You can walk around the old chantier naval. So it's called the Parc des Chantiers, I think is what it's called. And there's a Buren, Daniel Buren.
Yeah.
There's an installation he did all along the Loire. They're giant circles and they light up at night. It's really, really interesting looking. We didn't see it at night because we were busy doing other things, but it's a really pleasant waterfront there that you can walk around in.
Do you realize, Annie, you have just said that you liked something that is contemporary art?
Yes.
I think this is a milestone.
Yeah, because that one is not foutage de gueule. This one is difficult to do. Like this one, the guy had to really think about this. There was work involved. The ones that annoy me is that they do nothing. They just hang a thing. And the only reason why it's in a museum is because they're famous. The end.
Let's go back to what you can see in Nantes. The cathedral. The cathedral, you were just telling me that it is now closed on the inside. Unfortunately, has had two fires. One fire in 1972, and they actually did a lot of rebuilding. And then just recently in 2020, there was another fire. So that is why it's closed. So what you can see is only the outside part. Mm-hmm. There is a museum, by the way, in the Chateau of the Dukes of Brittany that is actually part of the Chateau. The pictures, I haven't visited it, but the pictures I saw, it looks enormous, and it's very, very intact. It's quite amazing because it started being built in the 1200s, so it was built over a specific period of time. But the cathedral is St. Paul and Pierre.
St. Paul Saint Pierre, yes.
St. Paul Saint Pierre, and it's a Gothic cathedral, which for the moment you can only see from the outside.
It looks ginormous, though. It's
very big.
Yeah,
yes,
big one.
It's very big. I'm not even sure. It's very strange that they had two fires in the space of basically 30 years. I wonder why, but no, 50 years, but whatever. And then there's the medieval neighborhood. You were mentioning that there was a section that has these very beautiful, elegant homes. Those are really from the 1700s. Those are actually from the 18th century when there was that was the style for rich people to build homes like that. But there's a smaller medieval section, which is where you had to walk when you couldn't do it. You couldn't get there with the taxi, with the Uber. And tell us a little bit about going to see the Passage Pomaré.
Okay, so Passage Pomaré is right in the center of the city. It's really very ornate, much more than actually the passages in Paris. But it's like a covered passage in Paris, except that it's on a hill, so there are steps. There's a grand staircase. We took it down, but you could walk it up. And all along, there are these beautiful stores all around. Unfortunately, we were there on a Sunday afternoon, so most of it was closed. There was a couple of stores that were open, but most of them were closed. But it's really worth a visit just to look at the Art Deco. I think it's Art Deco.
It's not Art Deco. The passage was built actually between 1841 and 1843, which is pretty much the end of the time when the passages were being built in Paris. So it's probably just a kind of ornate style that's closer to what was done the century before.
It could be Belle Époque.
It could be Belle Époque. Belle Époque is a little bit later. It's probably it's a mishmash. I mean, I looked at it online. It's a bit rococo. It's got lots of sculpture. It's got lots of curves and pinnacles and things like that. And so it was either one of the Napoleons or one of the last. The last Louis was earlier than that. It was one of those who financed it because that was the beginning in the 19th century of doing very fancy kind of stuff.
It is very fancy. Indeed, it's beautiful. Yeah, it's gorgeous.
And as far as I understand, I know I have not walked it, but what I was reading about it yesterday is that it is really the only one that is on 3 levels like that. And that, so it was very interesting from an architectural point of view that they chose to do that.
Yeah. Well, it makes it visually very appealing
Yeah.
because you have a nice view, either up or down. It's very nice. Another thing that I liked about Nantes is that the city center has this green line. If you follow that, it will take you to all of the interesting stuff to see in the city. So you could, if you know absolutely nothing, you don't need a map or anything. You can just follow the line. And so some of the places where I saw the line, I was like, well, this is not super interesting. But of course, having written voice map tours, and you have too, that there are places you need to get from point A to point B. And in between, it's not fascinating,
And there were no plaques or anything to explain things?
There were plaques at times, yes, but not always. It's just a walk. It's a stroll that you can take, which I thought was very nice.
They have several museums. Now, Jules Verne came from there.
Right, and we didn't go. That would have been fun.
It's supposed to be a wonderful little museum.
Right, that's why 3 days might be better. Because, we had 2 days, but really... half a day we went to a sports event because I was taking photos of a sports event. So, we really only had a partial. One of the days was 3 hours, was 4 or even maybe 4 were taken by that. So, but I think you need a little more time because going to the Jules Verne Museum would have been really interesting.
I have no idea how big it is. For me personally, I think 2 full days in Nantes is probably a good amount of time, but because you have some stuff you walk around outside and then you don't want to spend all your time in the museums. The museums there are not that big, but I would have loved to have visited the Jules Verne Museum because I really like Jules Verne. And they have a very nice, but not too big, Fine Arts Museum. Mm-hmm. And there is the Museum of the History of the Dukes of Brittany inside the Chateau.
Yeah.
So if you had enough time to get in, you would have been able to visit that as well.
Right. And this time there was a special exhibit on the slavery trade in Nantes, which I thought was really good that they do that. That, they admit we were involved in this and this is nothing to be proud about.
Right. This is part of their big history. Yeah. Actually, what I was reading yesterday was that there is right now a move to make a separate museum just about that, but it has not been done so far. I guess they're still questioning whether it's a good thing to talk about that much or not. They have some festivals and carnivals. Nantes has a Carnival, which is the end of this month, March. And France has a few cities that have Carnival, and this is one of the big ones. It's a big procession with lots of floats and costumes and music. And it's obviously not Mardi Gras, the day of, which is when it is in Nice, for instance. So I'm not sure how they decide which day it is. They have a festival of cinema. That's a festival of cinema that is from Asia, Africa, and South America. And it's over 3 days. And then they have a day called La Folle Journée, which is a day of classical music. And it's not the Festival of Music Day, which is the summer solstice. It's just some day, I don't remember which day it was, but where there's classical music everywhere in the city.
Nice.
Which sounds very nice.
Yeah.
So it's kind of walking around, and instead of hearing somebody banging a lot of noisy drums, you get to hear somebody playing a pretty violin.
That's great.
Yeah. And did you eat anything special while you were there?
Oh, yes. We had some meal. But before we get to the food, I need to tell you about the Basilique Saint-Nicolas, which is city center. It's very cute. And we had a very interesting encounter in there. There was this man who approached us as soon as we walked in. And he was very well dressed. He had gold teeth, which you don't see a lot of gold teeth these days. And it was evident immediately that he was begging, but not in a beggar kind of way. He approached you and he chatted you up about his miserable life. And of course, this week, the flavor of the week was Ukraine. He was from Ukraine and whatever. And I'm sure last year he was from Syria and, whatever. And it's very funny because our daughter went separately and she ran into the same guy. and as soon as she started mentioning that some guy wouldn't stop chatting her up, I said, gold teeth, right? So he's a character, and he's in there making his living, but he's totally harmless. I had a €2 coin in my pocket. I gave it to him.
So they let him stay there.
I don't think he lives at the church, but he works everybody who visits the church. He's very interesting. There's a Merveilleux de Fred.
What is that?
The pastry shop. They make Merveilleux is this delicious meringue, delicacy, I guess. And his are particularly good. And he has he has several in Paris. There's one in the Marais that is always mobbed. And there's one in Nantes as well, in the city center, which I thought was very nice. And I wish I had time to visit the Jardin des Plantes, but we didn't, because the Jardin des Plantes in Nantes is particularly nice as well, but there wasn't enough time.
A big one?
A fairly big one, yes. Yeah, it sounds like it's very good. And as far as food is concerned, you're going to tell us about the specialties, but we had some fun restaurants. I have some good restaurant recommendations for Nantes as well. We ate, first of all, they have an entrecôte, which we went to.
I know you love.
We're suckers for, steak frites. So we went. And it was exactly the same as anywhere else, really. I mean, and we had a lovely dinner as well at a place called Le Lion et l'Agneau, which is, I think it's a Michelin Bib restaurant. It was very, very good. I totally recommend it, but we had to reserve that in advance because it's, booked solid otherwise. And the other one that's very popular is La Cigale. It's right downtown as well. It's very, very art deco. I think that's the style. Or it might be Belle Époque. No, I think it's Belle Époque. It's very highly decorated. The photos look wonderful. The food is fine. Like don't go for the food because it's just fine. But it's really, really gorgeous. And to get a table there, you have to, work it. So the reality of it is you book in advance, like 2 weeks in advance, or you show up because they open at 11 and they serve nonstop all afternoon. On weekends, it is mobbed. There's always like 100 people in front of the door. So and these are 100 people who have reserved. So we reserved and we still waited an hour outside the door.
Wow.
Okay. It's super popular. So what you could do if you didn't reserve is you show up at like 3 p.m., between 3 p.m. and 5 p.m. on a Sunday afternoon or on a Saturday afternoon, because that's when they have a lull and the kitchen is still going. So that's my pro tip, or either that or reserve in advance because it's really very popular. But it's gorgeous in there. That's why people want to go.
And did you eat anything special there?
We had good meals, but it was nothing
particular to Nantes in that sense, no?
Well, nothing I haven't had anywhere else. No.
Okay.
But maybe I didn't order the right stuff. I mean, I always order what looks good to me. So.
Yeah, I in terms of, fish or meat, I'm not sure, but of course there's a duck dish called the canard nantais, which is interesting because unlike most of the other duck recipes that you will find specifically in the Southwest, they use a little bit of the white wine from that area in the sauce, which was very different. And of course, that's my favorite thing from Nantes, which is their muscadet, the muscadet de Nantes, which is, there's also one called La Plante. Both of these are specific and grown in the region right around the city of Nantes, and they are dry white wines that are very lovely and not expensive, and they're wonderful to have with mussels and fish, and it's very, very popular to buy. And in fact, when we go up to Brittany, I always go into the store and buy several bottles to bring back, because you can find this in pretty much most supermarkets, but they have certain ones there that are really good. And I will put in the text, but it's called Muscadet sur Lit.
Ah, oui.
And there's a specific region where this is the muscadet that they grow, and it's a very nice, very light, dry white wine.
Yeah, I have enjoyed that very much.
It's really very nice.
Yeah.
It's a great summer wine, actually. The Berlingots, I was asking you before, there's a hard candy.
I love it. Les Berlingots. I had forgotten that it was from Nantes, but now that you mention it, yes, I do remember.
Okay, I have a question for you. Is that a relative to the shape? Is it called that?
I think so. Yes, because there's other kinds of Berlingots, and they are all shaped like that.
So it's kind of like a square, little square. Right?
No, it's not a square.
Square. What is it?
No, it's a pyramid.
It's a pyramid.
It's a pyramid-shaped candy, or it could be a little baggie that's shaped like a pyramid, and that's a Berlingot.
That's a Berlingot.
Yeah,
I like the word.
And the hard candy is, I don't know, the flavors are good. For some reason I love
like them.
Yeah.
And they have a very funny named fromage, cheese. They have a cheese called the Curé Nantais, which is kind of nice because the curé means priest. Right. So we won't.
I have not had the pleasure of eating
the priest.
No.
It's a cow cheese. It's a square cow cheese that looks a little bit like some of the Normandy cheeses, but I'm sure it's similar. And a very, very famous factory for cookies is from Nantes, originally from Nantes from 200 years ago, and that is the Lu factory, L-U.
Les Petits Lus.
Les Petits Lus, and there are all kinds of Lu. There's the Petit Beurre, and then now, of course, they make zillions of kinds of cookies, but it's a brand that everybody in France knows, and it is from Nantes. It's two gentlemen who began at the very beginning of the industrial era to make cookies in what we would call cookies, what the French would call a petit biscuit sec in Nantes, and it has been there ever since. And they have mâche, which is very silly, and I'm sorry, it's like mâche grows wherever it's a kind of green. I don't know if in the States what we call it actually.
I think it's called mâche.
Is it called mâche?
Yeah.
It grows where there's water.
Yeah.
And so basically it's a wild thing that they just sort of started cultivating, but it apparently comes from the region right outside of Nantes. And you mentioned earlier, just as a mention to that, Nantes is no longer a naval, a place where shipbuilding is done. But it is very often associated with Saint-Nazaire, which is just 20 kilometers. It's actually on the other side of the Loire. It's basically not even 20 kilometers away. So sometimes when people talk about Nantes, don't get confused if you see things that say Nantes and Saint-Nazaire, because Saint-Nazaire is actually a separate little city, and that's where all the humongous cruise boats, all the big the boats that go out that are now 5, 6, 7 stories high, and all of it's the biggest,
more than that.
It's the biggest shipbuilding center in France.
Right, Royal Caribbean ships,
and private yachts as well. They do.
Yeah,
they do all of those.
Yeah, and that's something I forgot to mention. But on the promenade, le Parc des Chantiers in Nantes, next to the Machine de Lille, there's also some giant cranes that are still there, that are a remnant, and they're quite interesting looking. I'll put some photos up, obviously, on Instagram, and they look really, really nice, nice looking cranes.
Did you know that the last time there was any shipbuilding directly in Nantes was in 1985?
I did not know that. No.
So it's not that far ago.
Yeah.
I mean, that far long ago. I mean, it apparently by that time, of course, most of it had moved over to Saint-Nazaire.
Yeah,
I think because of the destruction that had been done during World War II, they just simply rebuilt the shipbuilding part a little further away from this commercial center of Nantes. But it was kind of interesting to see that the very last time one was launched and finished and launched, I guess in that order, was actually in 1985.
Mm-hmm. And you can still see the ramps for the huge boats to go into the water. There's also an old warship that is parked there by the side of the Loire. I don't know if you can visit it, but it's clearly of worship. But it's not used today. But it's just an interesting thing to see, kind of a nod to the history of shipbuilding that they did there. That was for a long, long time. It was a major industry.
It was a major industry. Yeah, it was one of the industries. Luckily for Nantes, it was not a mono industry city from the get go. I mean, really, because with the changes over time, it would have been totally economically depressed if it had only been a shipbuilding city. But of course, it managed to become something else. Yeah.
So tell us about some of the interesting things that have happened in Nantes, because obviously it has a long history, right?
Well, yes. I mean, Nantes, interestingly enough, a lot of the coastal cities was a city that was settled a very long time ago. It was, as I mentioned earlier, since it is the doorway into Brittany, it was settled first by a group of Celts or Celts who were part of the different groups that are Bretons, I guess. And its name comes from one of the first groups that settled there. And, of course, it was consistently a port and a commercially active port for centuries and centuries and centuries. And it was a separate kingdom. It was not part of France. It was part of what actually was the dukedom, or I don't even know if it was the dukedom or the kingdom of Brittany, and it was the capital. And it wasn't until the last legitimate daughter of the last king of Brittany, or Duke of Brittany, married the king of France, and that was Louis VII, and her name was Anne, that Brittany actually was annexed to France. So all the time it was kind of a rival kingdom, and they were constantly fighting about whether or not it would be part of the Kingdom of France, which of course the French really wanted. So in the 1400s, this young woman named Anne was married off to the king, and it was annexed. But interestingly enough, it was when her daughter, Claude, was married off to the king's nephew, and that was Francois I. This is now already in the Renaissance, that Brittany officially became a part of the country as we know it now, the Kingdom of France. And what she brought with her as a dowry, if you can imagine, was the entire region of Brittany and all the wealth that it had, which was a lot. There was a huge amount of wealth there. Wealth that actually, interestingly, some of it is mineral, some of it is agriculture, and some of it is due to the coast and all the activity on the coast. However, Nantes was a city that was a major player in that part of France during the War of Religions, which is very soon after Francois I, which is already in the 1500s, which theoretically the Renaissance should have been a time of humanity, but unfortunately the War of Religions in France didn't turn out to be that way. And Nantes was actually very, very, very Catholic. So what's strange and interesting is that people in France who are descendants of the Protestants, the Huguenots, and people elsewhere, like in the States, who know that their ancestors were Huguenots who fled France. Everyone knows about something that I know you learn in school, which is the Edict of Nantes. Mm-hmm. And the Edict of Nantes was signed by Henry IV, the King Henry IV, and it was a paper that gave religious freedom and was about religious tolerance to everybody. And everybody, I think, including me, assumed that because it was the Edict of Nantes, that it was in Nantes that everything was hokey dokey and everybody was nice to each other, and absolutely not. So why it was signed in Nantes, I think it was because there was a castle there. But in fact,
beautiful chateau, by the way.
A beautiful castle, right? Yeah. But the people of Nantes were against this edict from the get-go. So there was terrible fighting there. And it wasn't, of course, until almost 100 years later that peace came back to the France in terms of the war between the Protestants and the Catholics. You know, it was a really nasty time. And then what happens is Nantes, which is still prosperous, decides to create something called the triangular commerce. And that is in the 17th century. That is in the 1600s. They wrote something called the Code Noir, which means the Black Code. And black as in people who are black. And Nantes, which was already a very prosperous port because it was importing sugar and tobacco from the colonies, established what is called the triangular trade, which means that the trade went between the Atlantic coast in France down to Africa, from Africa to the French Caribbean, and from the French Caribbean back to France. And that trade meant that they were exchanging African slaves for the goods that were produced in the French Caribbean and bringing them back to Nantes. And it is a fact that Nantes was the most important slave city in terms of trade for 150 years. Many people think it's Bordeaux, but it turns out that it was actually Nantes that was. So between 1700 and 1750, 75% of the slave trade actually came out of Nantes.
Wow.
And that is where a lot of these very wealthy families...
Now, you're not saying 75% of the slave trade in the world. You mean in France?
No, in France.
Okay,
yeah. No. I mean, in the 1700s, unfortunately, France was not the only country doing that. The number is, I don't know if these are exact, but what I was reading was that there were approximately 500,000 Africans that were shipped out in boats that came out of Nantes. And, of course, all of that did not end until 1831.
Dang.
Well, it was. They had stopped slavery, and then Napoleon reinstated it in the colonies. And then it was Louis XVIII who actually ended slavery for forever. So Nantes had to rebuild its reputation, basically, after that, right? Because even though... many people know that a lot of the riches of the city came from that. You have to sort of do something to redeem yourself as a city. And luckily for them, during the French Revolution, they were very Republican, which is very different from the period of time when they were ultra-Catholic and very different from the time that they were into slavery. And so they were... very, very, very Republican, and they were fighting. That is, they were fighting for the revolution against the monarchy, which is interesting. And they were very active. And there were apparently a couple of prisons there that were very active in the terror. Nantes has a very interesting history when it comes to different things like that. It's like they take extreme positions on a lot of things. So the history was that they basically were part of the revolution, and then once everything calmed down again, which of course brings us into the 19th century, it went back to being a very good commercial port, always with shipping in and out of sugar. And the two big sugar companies of France are based there. The textile shipbuilding, which of course didn't end until the basically end of the 20th century. And then, like many, many places in France, went into a kind of lull at the beginning of the 20th century. It turns out that there was shipbuilding that was moving away. So, economically it had a lull. But this is really interesting. World War II. So it's kind of turned into a quieter city, not quite as wealthy as it was in the 1800s and all of that. Not because of its position on the Atlantic, was one of the very first cities occupied by the Germans. It was taken over by the Germans in June of 1940. And the Germans occupied the entire city. And the people of the city, much in the same spirit as they had with the French Revolution, they were enormous in terms of creating a resistance. But it wasn't the people of Nantes that created an event that has come down to the history. And I don't know if you noticed it or saw it when you were walking around, but there's a monument to this specific event that happened in Nantes. A year later, in 1941, 3 young resistants came from Paris, and their mission was to assassinate the leaders of the German occupation. Now, nobody knows if the local people knew that this is what they were going to do, but they just showed up one day, 3 young people. One of them was 17, one of them was 18, and the other one was in his early 20s. And they were misinformed. And so they walked around the city center looking this sounds stupid. It sounds like a bad movie. They walked around looking for German officers to just go up and shoot, which sounds very stupid and very poorly organized. And one day, I don't know how many days they were actually there, but they were there for a week or two. They were by the cathedral where you were, and they saw these two officers, German officers, walking. They didn't know who they were. They walked up to them and shot them point blank. And it turns out that one of them, the one they killed, was the field commander of the entire German occupation of Nantes and the region. And the other one, interesting or strangely or sadly, whichever your position is about it, he survived and he recognized them. And it turns out, because it happened to be the head German officer, that what the Germans did was they immediately went out 2 days later and they took 50 hostages.
Right.
And they waited a few days to see if they would be able to find the 3 people who killed them. And when they did not find these 3 young men, they simply executed all 50 of the hostages. Right. So there is a huge monument in the center of the old part of Nantes with the names of all of the people that were killed. And then nearby, there is actually a plaque or a monument that I haven't seen that has the names of the 3 members of the resistance, 2 of whom were found very soon afterwards, sent into a prison and killed. And the third one lived till 2009.
Wow.
He actually lived to talk about it much later. He apparently didn't talk about it for years and years and years. After that, interestingly enough, post-World War II, Nantes came back into a prosperous period. And so in 1962, it was the beginning of the huge university center. It was the first city to have an electric tramway. It was one of the first cities to have the TGV, the bullet train. And it picked up its commerce really starting in the 1960s and 70s. And it is now the 4th biggest university population, interestingly enough, in France. It's a city that students love to go to for that reason.
Yeah. It looks like a happening place. Like, really, honestly, I think it's a lovely town.
And it's a city that's had a lot of ups and downs, but it has a very, very long history. And it would be interesting to visit one of the museums there and see how they present all of that history.
Yeah, I really think, we had 2 days, not 2 full days. I think we needed 3. I really think we needed 3.
You're going to do all the museums.
Well, at least 1 or 2, because if you don't see any of them,
especially because there are so many things, the whole history of the glory of Brittany and then the history of the slave trade and
the 2 I would have liked to see were the expo about the slave trade and the Jules Verne.
And Jules Verne.
That would have been my 2 picks. I wouldn't have gone to the art museum because I do love art, but you have to select. I mean, you have to be, I prefer history to just art for the sake of art.
And I would guess that the museum in the Chateau really talks a lot about the period when the Dukes of Brittany were so powerful, which is really kind of interesting. Because they were very, very, very powerful.
Right. And it's interesting that today, Nantes, as far as how France is cut up, it's in the Loire Atlantique instead of Bretagne. Okay.
And apparently, it's one of those questions that everybody fights over.
Yeah.
Like, is it Brittany? Is it not Brittany? Is it part of Brittany? Is it part,
It's both.
Both.
It's both. Historically, you have to put it in one one region or another. So fine, it's in Loire Atlantique. It's hard to argue that it's not Loire because it's on the Loire River, but it's also very, it's also a seaport and close to the sea, and part of. The Ducs de Bretagne, that's the massive chateau in the center of Nantes.
In the center of Nantes. And there is a big thing that says Gateway to Brittany.
Yeah.
So, as far as I'm not from there, but as far as I'm concerned, it's the beginning of Brittany.
Yeah. It's a lovely place. I think if you have a chance to visit, you will enjoy it. Thank you very much, Elise.
You're welcome, Annie.
Au revoir.
Au revoir.
Again, I want to thank my patrons for supporting the show and giving back. Patrons get several exclusive rewards. For doing so, you can see them at patreon.com/join us. Patreon. Join us, no spaces or dashes. Thank you all for supporting the show. Some of you have been doing it for a long time. You are wonderful, and I appreciate you very much. And a shout out this week to new patrons Shannon S., Marjorie Schneider, Tom C., Brian McMahon, Kathy Luquette, and Caroline Schoenberger. Thank you so much for becoming patrons and making this podcast possible. My thanks also to Nathan Lewis, Teresa Angelino, Linda Lynn, and MK Nobler for sending in a one-time donation by using the green button on any page on joinusinfrance.com that says Tip Your Guide. How are things going with you, my friend?
Well, let's see. Things are going okay. It's springtime, which is always a good time of the year. And I have some visits of Toulouse and of the surrounding area, thanks to some clients that have come through our podcast, Join Us in France. And for those out there who may or may not be coming through this area, you should know also that I have a voice map tour, an audio tour. So you can either hire me or you can hire my voice.
In the flesh?
In the flesh. Oh my God, yes, in the flesh. You can hire me in the flesh for a tour of Toulouse, Albi, Carcassonne, something in the area. Or you can simply pick up my tour of Toulouse called The Glory of Occitania.
On the Voice Map app?
On the Voice Map app. It's hard to say, the Voice Map app. And you can take me with you and do your tour by yourself as you walk around.
Yes, and I would love for Elise to do Carcassonne and Albi as well on the Voice Map app. But I'm working on her.
She's working on me. I think the next one, I have to put it all together, but I think Carcassonne might be next.
Excellent. Yes. And so if you would like to hire Elise in any of these ways, go to her website, toulouseguidedwalks.com, and take it from there. It's a great resource and a wonderful way to enjoy the Southwest with somebody who's been living there for freaking ever.
Oh, my goodness. Yes, indeed.
Actually, you might have been in Toulouse longer than me because I was away for so many years, even though I was born here.
Well, altogether, no. I think in our total lifespan, I think you've actually been in Toulouse longer. But I have been here now, believe it or not, almost 25 years.
Wow. ToulouseGuidedWalks.com. And of course, by now, you know about the itinerary consultant. I'm very happy that the service is as popular as it is. And I am going to close it down a little bit over the summer. I'll take 2 weeks off in June and probably 3 weeks off in July. So if you want my help for a trip in the fall, don't put it off too much because right now, so this is the 3rd of April, I'm fully booked out until May 17th. So I have, 6, 7, sometimes 8 weeks of time between the time you send in your document telling me about what you want to do and the time we actually get to talk. So do plan that a fair bit in advance. Once in a while, I have somebody jump the queue, but that's only when I messed up, when I forgot an appointment or something. Anyway, all of that is at joinusinfrance.com/boutique. This week in French news, well, the news is full of Ukraine and presidential campaign. The first round of election is next Sunday. The polls are all over the place. But in France, the polls are going to have to be quiet. I think it's a full week. I think they can't publish any more polls for a full week before the election. So it'll be very nice to not have constantly, oh, look, this guy is ahead now, and oh, no, she's ahead, whatever. Yeah, it'll be nice. I would rather just wait and see what the actual vote says and not worry about it too much. COVID numbers are on the rise as well in France. Nothing too horrible, but the number of hospitalizations is not decreasing anymore, and it had been. I mean, it's not spiking either. It's just staying steady. There is no talk whatsoever of going back to the health pass or any restrictions of any sort. My husband started feeling sick this week. He got tested for both COVID and the flu, which I didn't know we could test for the flu. This is a new thing in France. And it's neither one. His symptoms are classic cold symptoms. So it's good to know that it's just a cold, and now I have it too. So, well, we'll live. The weather has taken a turn for the worse this week. It's actually snowing outside of my window as I type this. Wonderful Finland decided to send us some cold and some snow. But it'll clear up by the middle of next week, and we'll be back to balmy spring. All that to say that when you ask what the weather is going to be like when you visit, well, nobody knows. There are freak weather events, and we're in the middle of one. It's not going to last. And I send warm wishes to Lachlan Cook, who is walking part of the Camino this week and next. And I'm seeing his photos online, and he looks like he's very cheerful despite all the snow and a red nose. For my personal update this week, a couple of weeks ago, my old VW old diesel car gave me a fright. I thought the turbo was dead, which was totally probable because it's pushing 200,000 miles. So I don't use that car a lot these days, but it's handy to have when I need to do messy things like take the dog somewhere, move bikes or furniture, take debris to the dump, that sort of thing. But the car is very long in the tooth, and if a really expensive repair comes up, like a turbo, then the car is going to the recycling. But I lucked out this time. It was only a radiator hose. While it was in the shop, I started looking at other cars, and this being the month of super high gas prices as well, I wondered if it was time for an electric vehicle. There are EV chargers peppered all over France, and I can charge at home. So I Googled for a few models, and I gave myself a fright at the price of these new EV cars. But I haven't bought a new car since the 90s, so sticker shock was to be expected. But I swear to God, 2 minutes after my first Google search, my Facebook page was entirely filled up with ads from car companies. I stopped seeing ads for food companies like Lidl, Picard, Super U, which was my normal fare. Now it's all Peugeot, Renault, Kia. No Tesla ads. They probably know I'm too cheap for Tesla. Or maybe Tesla does not advertise on Facebook. I don't know. No ads for the Nissan Leaf either, which is the one, that one I'm tempted. At any rate, it is shocking how fast Facebook figures out what products I'm interested in. I knew it already, but when it happens, it's just like boggles the mind. And a funny tidbit about life in France. In France, mailboxes are not federal property. So it's totally okay for artisans and whoever to print out flyers and deliver them all over the mailboxes in the village. Yesterday, I got 2 things hand-delivered to my mailbox. One was a full-color 10-page mini newspaper about Éric Zemmour, the right-wing nutcase, who is a candidate for the presidential election. And the second was an envelope with a small flyer and deposit slip for the Catholic Church. So we have someone who wants me to donate to the church and vote for a right-wing nutcase. The more things change, the more they stay the same. I wish I had seen the person making the delivery, but I did not. Well, it's probably better that way. I'm taking care of Swiffer the dog this week while his mamas are away taking a small vacation in Venice. He's behaving generally very well. He's not ran off yet. And he is an escape artist. But an hour ago, when I went looking for him in the garden, fully fenced and gated, of course, I saw that he had a dead pigeon in his mouth. I don't think he killed the pigeon. It's possible my innocent-looking cat, Ananas, did that. She does that once in a while. But he found it in my yard and he ate it. I tried to get him to give up the pigeon, but he's faster than I am and very, very determined to eat dead birds. That makes him a charognard. A charognard is a scavenger. So you have your French word of the day. I'm not sure you'll use it on vacation, but charognard equals scavenger. All right, I'm off because I'm also recording 2 episodes with a wonderful guest this morning. Hello, Jennifer. And so I need to stop talking. Show notes for this episode are on joinusinfrance.com/383. And you can see a recap of what we discussed, links, photos, all that good stuff. Next week on the podcast, an episode about the beautiful city of Nice with a person who lives there, has written a book about it, has written a voice map tour about it. She really knows her stuff. You will see. I think you will love that episode. Send questions or feedback to Annie@joinusinfrance.com. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you join me next time so we can look around France together. Au revoir. The Join Us in France travel podcast is written, hosted, and produced by Annie Sargent and copyright 2022 by Addicted to France. It is released under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives license.